welcome back to Behind the Curtain Territories. I'm Chris Page, being joined for the second week in a row by my main man, the Lariat, Eric. What's up, man?
Oh, not much, man. Just ready to dive into some deep wrestling content here.
I'm not even gonna lie, dude. I was gonna go into this whole the Lariat, Eric, and my botched on your last name. I'm not even gonna lie. Call it wake and bake on a Saturday morning for me. But I had this whole thing in my head. I was gonna do this whole rollout of the full blown name, and my bad, bud. I bricked first thing.
You're good, Eric. The Lariat Steel.
I knew it. I knew it started with an
Yeah.
S. Man, it's good to have you back, brother. We had a pretty good show last week. I want to spend a few minutes talking about that and talking about the several comments from the listeners, several subscribers to the channel, all over the glory that was Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. All the feedback's been pretty positive, and of course, as soon as we got off the air, I found like all the old Georgia TVs from '79 to '85 on YouTube.
Oh, sure, of course, it's going to happen that way.
Yeah.
I also want to say this to our listeners. We're going to put Eric and I are going to put in some production on this on these podcasts moving forward. We're going to get you some video clips in. We're going to try and match up what we're talking about. It's a lot of fun to sit down and see where wrestling has come from to where it is now, and talk about a lot of these territories that had such an impact on even today's product. It's still heavily influenced. We started off last week, as we said, with Georgia Championship Wrestling, and then you wanted to pivot over to Portland, to Pacific Northwest. What was the vision behind that?
So Portland is a territory that you never really heard a whole lot about. It did get some, popularity with the Vice series, the Tales from the Territories. They covered Portland there. I first heard of Portland wrestling in Roddy Piper's book when I read it, and then the same guy that introduced me to Georgia, man, he used to say, you remind me of Buddy Rose," because I actually looked kind of like Buddy Rose when I was younger. Maybe a little bit better shape than Buddy Rose, maybe not. But anyways, he said, "Man, you remind me of Buddy Rose. You remind me of Buddy Rose." And I said, "I don't know who Buddy Rose is." So after he picked his jaw up off the floor, he gave me some Portland tapes, and it got me into it. Man, like I was hooked. The Sheepherders, who most people know as the Bushwhackers, I never saw them like that before. Like, you're used to I grew up loving the Bushwhackers, used to that cartoony comedy stuff, but man, they were bloody and violent as the Sheepherders. Roddy Piper was cutting great promos. Young Rick Martel is a babyface, not a model. Just so many good guys came through that territory. Those four are the ones that, the feud that initially hooked me on Portland wrestling. So those are the ones that stick out the most in my head. But man, there was a who's who list come through Portland. And you getting to read about him, you find out that the promoter was considered probably the best payoff guy in the business. The last running territory, unless you want to count USWA, was Portland. So just a lot of heritage there, man. I think where it was just tucked so far away from, most American wrestling fans, you don't really hear a lot about it. It's kind of gotten forgotten.
Well, we're gonna try and enlighten some of the listeners on some of the great talent that came through, some of the memorable feuds that stick out. There's only one thing left to do, man, and that's to hop in the time machine. So you ready?
All right.
You ready to go back to the 20s?
Yeah,
Well,
I got my flux capacitor changed out, so I'm ready to go.
all right, man. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen out there, why don't you step back in time with us? We're gonna go back to Pacific Northwest Wrestling. We're gonna step in our DeLoreans, and we're going back in time right now.
From the City of Roses historic sports arena, it's Portland Professional Wrestling.
Well, we made it back in one piece. We're back
Yeah.
into the early days of the 20s, brother. With the early days of Pacific Northwest Wrestling.
I think I went a little bit further back than you. That new flux capacitor overestimated its power. I landed in the late 1880s,
Oh
or I'm
yeah.
sorry, early 1880s.
Well, let's go then. Let's go.
All right, so but in 1883, this is actually in the Oregon State Encyclopedia, which is kind of crazy to me. That's where I found this at. They started. Portland was considered like a huge wrestling city for Greco-Roman and what was called Scotch backhold wrestling, or most people would know it as catch as catch can wrestling. And man, they had a who's who coming through there in the 80s, or the 1880s, I should say, where, wrestling was still kind of worked, but also, had a lot more shoot to it. Like, you'd see two people wrestle for an hour and a half or so.
Yeah, that was way back. This is when we were talking last week. It's funny how some things just come full circle and we don't intend to. We were talking about how it would be good to get some of this really old footage, and I was able to find a piece of what was considered the first professional match caught on film. You got those hour and a half, 2 out of 3 fall matches. You would have like 2 or 3 matches on the card, and they would all go an hour plus. Versus nowadays, we're lucky to catch a 25 to 30 minute match.
Yeah, that's a long time now. I'm talking back like, if we got any workout people out there, have you ever heard of the hack squat? It was created by George Hackenschmidt, who was one of the very first big national professional wrestling names back in the 1880s and the 20s and teens.
Let's go. I'm gonna have to clip that in for the listeners so that they can get a peek at that. You're back in the 1800s. I don't know a whole lot about all that. So catch up to me in modern era of the 1920s, unless there's anything.
All right, I'm going there right now. No, I just wanted to touch on how apparently Portland was a huge arena. Mechanics Arena in Portland was considered one of the biggest wrestling venues at the time. Just thought that was kind of interesting. Thought we'd go ahead and throw that out there. But it looks like I'm coming up on the 20s right now with Herb Owen, the first promoter of what was then Big Time Wrestling. People loved the name Big Time Wrestling back then, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And, for those out there familiar with wrestling history, Herb Owen and later both of his sons were prominent figures all throughout professional wrestling for at least 60, 70 years.
So we'll go ahead and touch on the story I heard about Herb Owen. There's some speculation here, but apparently Herb Owen was just like a simple farmer. And there was already the guy that had the light. There's only at the time had to be one promoter's license in each state. And the guy that had the promoter's license in Oregon, his name is escaping me because I've only just heard this story once. He went on like vacation or a trip somewhere, and while he was going, his house burned down, and somehow it's got the license. After his house burned down, the license was lost, because back then you had to have a paper copy of your license, like an actual physical copy. Herb Owens got the license while he was gone, and began promoting shows.
And just started.
Yeah, just so happened to be ready in line to go file for that application.
I love it. He got into the business, started the business, but it really picks up by what you say in the 40s, you'd say?
Yeah. Okay, so here it is. They had hired Herb Owens as their assistant, and while they're on a trip in Australia, Owens, they gave Herb ownership of the company while they're out of the country. And due to the rules in effect, Oregon, at the time, Owen had the sole rights as the sponsor, as a promoter. He was only be one promoter for boxing and wrestling back then. And their house kind of burned down, and they never came back, and Herb just kind of kept the territory,
That's true. That's right. I remember hearing that
Yeah,
as well. That he
yeah,
just kind of, snuck his way in, uh,
yeah.
and maintained the business, and passed it on to to later on to his kids. But that's a hell of a way to break in, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, going from assistant to sole owner of the rules of the game back then, And so he started in the 20s running it. And you even had big names coming through back then. Because you did boxing and wrestling back then. They'd mix them
Yes.
together. You even had Jack Dempsey in there. And now Jack Dempsey was, if you don't know who Jack Dempsey was, he's considered one of the best boxers of all time, especially back then. He was, a huge name.
Yeah, he's in the boxing world. He's one of the first notable names, I would believe.
So they were running in the 20s. The Owens family started this. They even had Gorgeous George, not Macho Man Randy Savage's valet from the the early
God,
2000s, but like the
I hope
original
not.
Gorgeous George. She aged very well, I guess.
There you go.
Oh yeah.
Herb dies in 42, and this is where Don kind of steps in, um, and ran from 44 all the way to 92. I mean, that's a hell of a run, and we'll get there. But there was a lot of happenings in this Don Owen sport era, because the National Wrestling Alliance forms in 1948. Don is one of the founding members, and we all know where the NWA and the legacy of the NWA and the territory days, like that was key. That had to be a big time deal, because the National Wrestling Alliance was, all the way up through, I would say, like, Bruno Sammartino's era, in the
Yeah.
WWF. The NWA was the premier, I guess, organization, or just to be associated with, right?
I would say even later than that. The NWA was until the 80s when WWF, until about WrestleMania 3, honestly. WrestleMania 2, the first Survivor Series and the first Royal Rumble were, especially Survivor Series, was created to really slow down the NWA's momentum, because they were running, I can't remember which Starrcade it was. I want to say it was Starrcade 3. It may have been Starrcade 2. I'd have to look this up real quick. They put on Survivor Series. And they said, look, if you carry, they put on Survivor Series to fight Starrcade. And they, or the Royal, and then they started saying, look, if you carry Starrcade, you're not going to get WrestleMania. And WrestleMania was still a bigger seller than Starrcade already. So, that it was the 80s when the NWA started to slowly die, and then WCW kind of took off by its own. Like Crockett territory was still part of the NWA. They were the majority of the NWA. They were the crown jewel of the NWA. But once Ted Turner took it over, that's kind of when the NWA started dying down.
And that was in '87. I
Yeah.
managed to do some quick research on the fly there, bud. I got your back.
Okay.
I'm like
All right, I appreciate it.
motherfucking goose, man. I got your six. Uh, yeah, no, you put it in that context. That makes total sense, and I could see that.
Yeah.
All the way up to '87. So to get this affiliation, and even to be a founding member of the National Wrestling Alliance, so that means that you've got some pretty good pull there.
Yeah, you've definitely got some clout in the wrestling world. And real quick, I know you told me it was 87. You got my back, so I'm gonna get your back here real quick. Don actually took over the company in 42, so he
Okay.
ran for 80 years.
Yes.
And then 44, he started women's wrestling, when it was still considered like uncouth for women to watch wrestling. Back then, like a lot of women, they wouldn't watch it they couldn't even watch it on television, let alone go to the matches in higher society. Uh, and he said, "Oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to put them on the card." So, he was definitely ahead of his time there as well.
I mean, he's kind of proven himself to be a little bit of a trendsetter here.
Yeah, for sure.
The 50s, I'm seeing some names like Ed Francis, Gory Guerrero, Tony
Yeah.
Bourne. They all come into the territory. what do you? Well, I'm not even going to ask you that because I think we weren't alive in the 40s and 50s. But is there any stories with any of these guys that ring any bells to you or strike out at you?
I mean, we all know who Gory Guerrero's father is, right? Or who his son is, right?
Oh yeah,
Eddie. That's
Ed.
Eddie right there, man.
Yeah, yep.
Eddie's dad. So I don't know a lot about that time frame. I just couldn't imagine, man. They had a 60-minute live television in the 50s. And I mean, look, F wasn't wanting to do Monday Night Raw live until the Monday Night Wars, and they were getting their shows spoiled. But they're putting on live television in the 50s, man.
Which is incredible in its own right.
Yeah,
I mean, when you really sit back and think about it, black and white's a thing. Like but there's maybe 2 channels at that point, 3 channels at best,
yeah.
and you're on one of them. So that's good
And
shit. Um, Listen to these
their
names.
television was, crossing into Canada too. So they were in like Washington State, Alaska. So maybe they got in Russia, British Columbia, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Utah, Wyoming. Like that's a big area.
You want to talk about big? Obviously, the 50s and 60s, the wrestling continues to grow. It continues to do its thing. And now we can get into some names that I am very much familiar with, and I believe you are too. When you start pushing into the 70s, we read this list off air, and it was just mind blowing.
Yeah. Now, before we get to the 70s,
Go
can
ahead.
we make a little pit stop in the late 60s?
We can. We can always go back in time, brother.
All right. So we got our time machines.
That's right.
So in 1966, they were putting over 15,000 people in an arena in the 60s to watch Luthez and Gene Kanitsky for the NWA World Title. Like 15, that's hard for people to draw 15,000 people now. Imagine it with the internet, television that goes all over the world. Man, they're just in those states alone in the 60s putting in over 15,000 people in an arena.
Killing it with 2 legends like
Yeah.
Kanitsky and Thez. I mean, Jesus Christ. We're definitely in the wrong era of wrestling, I think.
Oh man, if I could pick any era to live in, it would have been the 70s and 80s as a pro wrestler.
For
So
sure. Exactly. Yeah, we can definitely hit that. Luthez was, I mean, he's still heavily talked about today by some of the greats in the business.
yeah, a little trivia here. Luthez invented the power bomb.
Oh yeah, it wasn't
Just
a
like
it wasn't a by accident thing like the DDT, correct?
no, it was.
Oh, it was a by accident. See, some of the best
Yeah,
moves just come off by accident.
he was going to power drive somebody, and that person went up too much when he went to pick him up, and he just picked him up and slammed him flat on their back and invented the power bomb.
And alas, it is history. Buddy Rose, Matt Bourne, Roddy Piper, Jesse Ventura, Jimmy Snuka, Stan Stasiak, Dutch Savage. All these cats are coming through here in the 70s, man. I mean, there's so much to talk about with a lot of these talents. I don't know when we'll ever talk about Jesse Ventura again, but I mean, how good was the body back in the day?
Oh man, he was so good. Like Ventura was one of the man. Let's be honest, he was probably a ripoff of oh man, why did his name just blank on me? I can see him right here in my head, man.
Give me some clues.
Champion in New York forever. Big blonde muscle dude.
Superstar Billy Graham.
Superstar Billy Graham. Yeah, he was a lot like Superstar Billy Graham. Maybe copied a good bit from Billy Graham. I can't believe his mind just blanked on me. My mind blanked when I was talking about Billy Graham. But man, like what a talker Jesse Ventura was. Like the outfits that he wore, so outlandish. Like man, he was just an innovator, really. There wasn't a lot of people doing that back then. You saw a lot of people like Jesse Ventura later on, but man, what an innovator he was. I'm talking about like cross-platform star, Navy SEAL to professional wrestler to movies to being the mayor, or being the governor.
Yeah, man. Who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
He was always such a great talker, and played a great antagonist role in just about anything they did. And he was not a bad performer either inside those robes, man.
No, and he also probably has one of the best lines in cinematic history.
Let's be fair.
I ain't got time to bleed.
Yes, I would have to agree.
I ain't got time to bleed. Come on.
It's epic. It's epic.
Yeah.
I know I want to spend a few minutes, if we can, talking about this feud with Buddy Rose and Matt Bourne.
Let's get into it, man. Buddy Rose is so entertaining.
I'm just saying, it's a crying shame that he never got either an NWA world belt run, or a world belt run anywhere outside of a small territory, because that guy knows how to draw some heat. And I even sent you, again, where this is behind the curtain, so I'll go behind the curtain. I sent you a DM this morning because I was doing some brush up and totally forgot about this angle. And I think my message was, we totally got to talk about Buddy Rose and Matt Bourne. What the fuck?
Yeah, Buddy Rose, man, he was all about getting the heat in the business. So, and I didn't hear this story until, like I said, the Vices tells the territory. That's probably my favorite thing The Rock's done on television, honestly. He's a producer of that. But anyways, Buddy Rose, I mean, I'm laughing already just thinking about this guy. So Buddy Rose was a overweight, not very attractive man. But his gimmick was he was the playboy. He was Ric Flair with Dusty Rhodes' body. And man, he was entertaining. His stuff in WWF, the blow-weight diet stuff, was hilarious. And also, if you ever watch him and Doug Summers against the Rockers from AWA, what a match that is. He could go in the ring for a big guy. So, anyways, Buddy Rose is doing this angle with Matt Bourne. Matt Bourne is from Oregon, big hometown babyface, and Buddy Rose is a heat magnet. Buddy Rose, in real life, marries Matt Bourne's sister. and they're not together for a year, and Buddy Rose is cheating on her with his own girlfriend. So they want to, it's maybe 2 months, I think, she finds out he's cheating on her with his old girlfriend. So they get a divorce, and they are using this divorce on television as part of their angle. And Matt Bourne apparently just wants to kill Buddy Rose. Comes into the locker room, tries to attack Buddy Rose at a show. Matt Bourne's dad was a wrestler, and I don't know if he was like an agent at this time, if he still wrestled. He was the only one that could stop Matt Bourne from tearing Buddy Rose apart at the time. And after that, Buddy Rose was scared for his life. He would ride home with guys and pay guys money, go into his house and check and see if Matt Bourne was in there waiting on him before he came in.
Well, Matt Bourne had actually, from what I saw, the same doc, busted down the door and fucking jumped him before they could. I mean, Jesus Christ, that Buddy had, apparently had a cat fight, a scratch in his face, and I'm just like, what the fuck am I? What are we 12? What's going on here? Like, but Jerry Jarrett always said personal issues draw money.
Personal issues draw money.
I mean, I just feel like that's it's. I'm not gonna lie, it's great television, but damn, like this is like. Imagine if something like this plays out, years and years later when it's wrestling is really mainstream, like that would get over today.
It would be over today. Buddy Rose would be a huge star today. His stuff, man, it'd be so over. He'd be so entertaining today.
This is the golden era, I believe, of Buddy Rose, outside of his run in AWA too, which, shout out for that, because that was tremendous work. And Matt Bourne obviously would go on to be Doink, and with the original Doink, and he also had a tremendous run of his own throughout the '80s, all across the independents, and we've spoken a little bit about Jesse. I want to talk a little bit about Stan Stasiak, and then we're going to get to your man, because your man is one of my men too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Stan Stasiak, he was a WWF champion too.
Mm-hmm.
Stan the Man Stasiak. His son, Sean Stasiak. Shout out to him. He follows me on Instagram. Man, he had a great look. So he just never really panned out for some reason in WWF. He was doing better in WCW before it closed. But Stan Stasiak, I don't know a whole lot about him. I just know that he was a big star for a long time.
Yeah, he back in, and I think I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but I believe he and Bruno had a run.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think he did the Heart Punch too.
Yeah, it may have been later down the line, or or it may have been lower. I don't know. I'll be corrected.
Yeah. Somebody will let us know, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. The man, Roddy Piper.
Oh, yeah. So he actually, we'll get started with him. And speaking of Buddy Rose, let's not forget Buddy Rose. Piper and Buddy Rose ain't show live, but, they bicycled it around, as they called all the other territories, all other television stations. Because they only got it live there and that broadcasting range of that television station. And Don Owen said, why would I buy another tape? I can just re-record. But Buddy Rose would record the television every week so he could critique his matches. So Buddy Rose is really how a lot of the Portland footage is still around, because he recorded his stuff to watch it and critique himself.
Oh, for sure. And that's the story that they told him behind Tales from the Territory. The donuts.
Yeah.
Watching himself was just fucking hilarious. But I mean, at least somebody did, right? At least he did.
Yeah.
So
at least somebody got it.
Let's talk about the beer busting bottle over his head on live television, Roddy Piper, and then
man, that's gotta
promo after promo after promo.
Oh man, that's gotta be one of the best things I've seen of Piper. Honestly, one of the best promos I've probably ever seen of all time. I'll put it up there with Hard Times. I'll put it up there with actually I don't need it. I don't need a partner. I need a son. I like that promo better than Hard Times. We'll put it up there with the greatest promos of all time. So it's a big heated feud between Roddy Piper and Rick Martel and the Sheepherders. And I believe they're getting ready to have a barbed wire match, maybe. Piper has a full glass bottle, because it wasn't full when it worked, really. So he has a full glass bottle of beer, and he busted over his head on live television. And he's covered in beer, and his head's cut open. There's glass everywhere. He's got blood running down his face. He just starts cutting this promo on the Sheepherders about it. Look, if I can do this to myself, imagine what I'm going to do to you, Sheepherders. You think you're tough. You think you can get bloody. Well, look at me, I'm bloody. We're going to get bloody. And, oh, man, what a promo. Yes. Just, if we can put a clip of that in here, oh, my goodness.
If I can find it, it's there.
And so that was on the first tape of Portland wrestling that I started watching. So shout out to Scotty McKeever, R.I.P. Scotty McKeever. Man, I love that dude. I think he knew what he was doing when he gave me that Portland television tape to start off, because we're watching a couple television matches, I don't know who this guy is, I don't know who that guy is, and then you get this promo, and man, I'm hooked after that. I want to see this match now.
For sure, and it looks like I may be able to make that happen. So,
all right.
So we may be able to peep that out in the episode, guys. Piper is. This is so obviously it's pre-NWA Piper, and listen to how over he is, right? If you listen, I'm play back some of these clips, and you hear this crowd reaction, man. There's no doubt in my mind that this guy is a star, right? He just presents that, and this was such a badass promo. Going into a team, now as you said at the top of the hour, the Sheepherders were vicious. They were fighters. They gave no fucks. They were here to just fucking destroy somebody. And Piper and Martel are coming in as the baby faces. This is just I am tougher than you, and I know it. So I'm going to prove it.
Yeah,
I love it, man. I think that That was a really hot angle for Portland, and it just shows how good Roddy Piper is.
Yeah, and it's just, man, like people try to say nowadays, hear people say, "Oh, well, the fans back then thought it was real." Like, no, they didn't. they knew, wrestling was a work. I mean, the wrestlers did. I mean, not everybody. Okay, you had your smart fans, but a lot of people knew, like, hey, this probably isn't real. What's still real? This probably isn't up on the level. But man, people suspended their disbelief. I don't think people weren't as jaded about it. They suspended their disbelief and they let themselves believe. And man, just look at how into it they are.
Mm-hmm. They're just it's there. Like the Piper Buddy Rose deal was that was a multi-year angle.
Yeah.
And it carried them into the 80s. And I mean, again, wrestling in the 80s really starts to heat up as across the nation, really. I mean, we're not quite to WrestleMania. We're several years out from that. But this is where, like, business to me in every territory starts getting red hot.
Oh man, 80 to 82 was huge for Portland television. Huge.
Yes.
And you had Don's brother Elton here. He was helping run. And after Elton passed away, his son Barry, he helped step into the business. We got to tell a story about Elton Owen and Adrian Adonis as well. So Elton Owen was kind of Don was considered a super nice guy. Elton, kind of like the opposite of Don. Like, he was a lot rougher, a lot more coarse, kind of angry, and he always walked around. And apparently his payoffs weren't as good, and the boys didn't want to work for Elton as much as they wanted to work for Don, but they had to go because it was part of the normal loop. So apparently Elton always walked around with a cigar in his mouth. Sometimes he was smoking it, sometimes he was just chewing on it. And Elton was a drinker too, so Elton was counting his money, and he was, a little too drunk. And Adrian Adonis took Elton's cigar that he had left in his ashtray. He shoved the cigar up his own butt and put it back in the ashtray. They said the rest of the day, Elton's walking around with this cigar like, "Why does it smell like crap in here? You guys need to take a shower."
Talk about a stink palm. Would you like a chocolate-covered pretzel? Jesus Christ. The ribs were real, right?
Oh, yeah. What a rib.
I'm just saying. Jesus. I know that's probably not the worst.
100% definitely not the worst.
In the 80s, going into the 80s, I mean, we got Billy Jack Haynes, King Parsons, Matt Bourne still there. Chris Adams comes through.
Yeah.
Rip Rogers, Buddy Rose is still a mainstay. Dr. David Schultz.
Dr. D.
These are some other names that, in the WWE maybe didn't get their just due, but man, out in these territories, they were draws everywhere. I mean, where do you want to start?
I mean, Chris Adams, man, he was considered an amazing worker back in his day. Like, he he brought in the English style. He could also work the American style, but then he had like a kind of a karate influence. Like, he was the first guy with the super kick.
Mm-hmm.
He's trained Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, he was an innovative, amazing worker back then. And he was actually in World Class back then too, but they had a working relationship with World Class, and they did a lot of talent exchanges. And apparently guys like Schultz and Chris Adams loved it when they came up there to the Pacific Northwest.
I mean, what's not to love, right? I mean, you're up there with Roddy Piper.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the Owens family was so loved. In 85, they've done something that's, really, you don't see it happen very often in the history of wrestling. And it doesn't really happen now. They had a 60th anniversary 60th anniversary wrestling extravaganza. They had stars from NWA, AWA, and WWF. They had the world champions of both the NWA and AWA on the line, as well as the tag team champions. Like let's run over this card here real quick.
Okay.
You got Cowboy Lang and Little Tokyo. Mega Marahashi. Okay, so this wound up being Colonel De Beers against Billy Two Eagles, Jerry Gray and Rocco Venturo, Carl Steiner and Steve Simpson, Bobby Jaggers and Ricky Vaughn, Timmy against Timothy Flowers and Chris Colt, Sergeant Slaughter and Kendo Nagasaki, Kurt Hennig and Larry Hennig against the Road Warriors, Rick Martel and Mike Miller, Ric Flair and Billy Jack Haynes for the NWA World Title. And then the main event is Roddy Piper and Buddy Rose in what was considered their blow-off match.
That is a list of who's who. Listen, look at Piper and Rose headlining over Flair.
Yeah, like what an amazing show,
right? And Roddy Piper finally gets that W or gets the W in the end, and that's all that fucking mattered there, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's the NWA World Title. Not only is it Ric Flair, an NWA World Champion, but Billy Jack Haynes is a Portland native too. Like he's a son of Portland, but that just shows how big Roddy Piper and Buddy Rose was. You know?
Yeah. No,
and that Rick Martel.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
That Rick Martel Mike Miller match was an AWA World Title match too.
That was. What is that? Where Martel had the belt, or is that where he won the belt?
Martel had the belt. He defended the belt.
Yeah, I mean,
so you got him over 2 world title matches, Buddy Rose and Roddy Piper.
Insane.
And at that time, Piper was with WWF, and he was allowed to come back and still do some Portland television.
I'm looking at that Road Warriors versus the Hennings, man. How cool would that have been to have seen live and in person?
Yeah, on the AWA World Tag Team Title match too, man.
It's insane.
What a show!
Right. I mean, I don't have words for it because
it's
just like when you sit back and you really think about the names on the card, and Flair and Haynes, for example.
Let's put that into context today. So say there's a local promoter that's been running for 60 years wherever you live. They have a big super show to honor this guy. You go, you have the AEW World Tag Team titles on the line. You have the AEW heavyweight title on the line. You have the WWE World title on the line because these are the equivalents of those back then. Mm-hmm. And then you have the biggest local feud you've ever had as the main event. You know, like just imagine that.
I'm here for it.
You know,
that would have been a good one to have attended. I want to see if I can pull some footage on that. See if it's out there. Just to see. What do you think the decline would be of Portland? I mean, obviously they continue to run. Like this is what you call that out. That's in '86, right? So. What Black Friday?
It was 85.
It was 85. Oh, so we're coming up on kind of Black Friday-ish.
Yeah.
But they still had local programming through 1992. And, I don't know what the true decline of the territory would be outside of Vince McMahon coughing up some money and sending a polished tape to the television market or the television station, because something else that I think is impressive in its own right, they did television on the same channel for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
I mean, like that it and drew numbers for 20 plus years. So would you say that McMahon is the culprit behind Portland ultimately coming to a close?
I mean, it's easy to say that Vince was the bad guy because he did affect so many. He was the Walmart to the local mom and pop shop. But really, it started in the late '80s with the the Boxing and Wrestling Commission.
Mm-hmm.
They affected the industry a lot through fines that they were levying for promoters. I mean, they were, I've seen a couple documentaries. They were coming after them hard. Then you also had WWF and WCW were starting. They were putting their television out everywhere, so it was really hard for them to compete. But Don Owens, man, he was the last remaining NWA charter in '87. So I mean, he started the NWA, and in '87, he's the last original member left, still running.
Mm-hmm. That's God Almighty if that's not a testament to believing in your product and believing in the concept. He held out till to the very end, and that's a huge list because there were a lot of territories affiliated with the NWA.
Yeah, and I mean, even after that, man, even in '87, after '87 when it started going downhill, they were still putting out some big stars like Art Barr. If people aren't familiar with Art Barr,
Oh yeah,
man, how over he would have been if he hadn't died early. Raven, but he was Scotty the Body back then, Steve Dahl, Rex King, he was developing some good young talent.
Art Barr, for those unfamiliar and listeners unfamiliar, teamed with Eddie Guerrero as the Love Machines.
Oh yeah,
Which was they had a very classic tag battle. I cannot remember the fucking opponents. It was I think it may have been at the first Triple Mania.
it was when Worlds Collide.
Worlds Collide. Sorry, when Worlds.
Yeah,
Collide.
it was a hair versus match. I think it was Octagon. I can't remember who his partner was right off. But man, that was awesome. And I've also seen Dom here, modernizing some stuff. Dom and Ray tagged. I think it was WrestleMania last year, maybe when they were wearing like the American flag themed gear. That was a throwback to Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero's gear that they wore at When Worlds Collide.
Correct. Art Barr is truly a what if story. I saw him with Guerrero, so I'm gonna have to try and see if I can see some stuff of him as a singles man. But
he was also in WCW as he did a Beetlejuice character, the Juicer.
Oh my god!
Yeah, it was and he would have he had baby powder on him, so he would take a bump and he'd hit, and like a big white cloud of puff would come up, So it was Octagon and El Hijo del Santo, which is son of Santo.
We get down to the nitty gritty here, and it's as they say, closing time. With Portland, I know that as I touched on earlier, that Vince had the structure of the deal. I guess the guy that was running the TV company was getting ready to step down, and knew that the person coming in, I guess he was kind of protecting Don for all extensive purposes. But Vince McMahon was supplying a tape and offering to pay to get the time slot, and Don was not willing to.
And I mean, another thing really that hurt him, in '91, their main television sponsor, they declared bankruptcy. The company did, so that definitely hurt him. They had the highest rated, and they even had Portland's television. They had the highest rated show. And when it was canceled in December of '91, it was aired for 38 straight years. That's almost as long as Raw's been on now. This was back then. It was the longest running non-news program on American television when it was canceled.
That's a testament. This federation, this organization, is probably an unsung hero to the territory days. And definitely deserves all the flowers that it can be given, because, think about that. Put that into context, like real context. It's been running longer or almost as long as Raw, right?
Yeah. At the time, only Meet the Press and CBS Evening News ran longer than their Portland Wrestling television show.
Shout out to those guys.
What
do you think the legacy of Pacific Northwest is always going to be?
And I would say it's got to be innovation. Don Owens, I think he's always going to be remembered fondly by the people that knew him. Everybody that's worked there, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Don Owen. And in the wrestling business where people love to bury each other, that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
The guy was an innovator. He bought his own studio and moved it in. You hear stories about he had his bleachers on rollers. So that way, if they didn't sell out the arena, he would just take some of the bleachers out and push them all together so it looked like it was sold out. So before you had your big time promotions putting the entire crowd on one half of the arena for the hard cam, Don Owens was moving his bleachers around, setting up the hard cam.
Don Owen's definitely a promoter of promoters, man. It's another one of those what if he was, maybe 20 years younger in 91 and really wanted to go to war. Do you think this could have been a territory that may have been able to have rivaled what the then WWF was trying to do?
That's going to be hard. So he would have had to try to branch out more, and where he was located, I think one of the biggest drawbacks for Portland was also one of the biggest beautiful things about it is that it was kind of a world into its own. It was in a more secluded area. They weren't in Los Angeles, they weren't in New York, they were in the Pacific Northwest. It wasn't super populated. They didn't have huge cities there back then, like Seattle and Eugene were like the two biggest cities. So I don't know if being based out of there, they would have been able to compete and try to go globally just because they didn't have the markets in that area for it, location. And I think the location was one of their biggest drawbacks and one of their biggest drawing factors as well. I mean, Piper loved it there so much, he moved to Oregon. That's where he made his home until he passed away. And he even tried to, restart Portland wrestling in the 2000s before he passed away as well. So, I mean, that shows his love for the area right there.
Well, Bud, I think as far as Portland is concerned, it being what I would consider one of the last territories standing in the battle, I think that it's kind of fascinating to see. Like to echo you're talking about the innovation, but it's really fascinating to see the groundwork that was done for a lot of these characters through this specific territory, who all went on, most of all went on to work for Vince McMahon in the WWE and WWF at some point in time. So the talent levels there, the audience was there. I mean, you have Buddy Rhodes and Roddy Piper. It doesn't get a whole lot better than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, those two got to be like, if you're doing a Mount Rushmore of Portland wrestling, you got to have Don Owen himself up there, Roddy Piper and Buddy Rose. The fourth spot's always available, but you got to have those three up there.
No doubt. I think we've covered Portland, man.
I think so.
I'm thinking I'm gonna give you a choice for next week.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you two choices. You've got Memphis, or you've got Florida.
Well, let me ask you: have you done Capital Wrestling yet?
I have not done Capital Wrestling yet. You want to go to Capital Wrestling?
So, considering next week is WrestleMania weekend, I think it may be fitting if we did Capital Wrestling.
Sold. Didn't take a whole lot, did it?
Twisted that arm real hard.
I know, man. I didn't want to get hit by that lariat, brother. It hurts brutal. You got anything you want to say to the peeps before we close out?
Hey, I know people checked it out last week. Thanks to everybody who checked it out, liked it. I know you said you got some new subscribers, and I appreciate it, man. Leave us some comments and let us know what you guys think.
As always, guys, we appreciate you listening. We'll be back next week, and I guess we're going to go to Los Angeles, and we're going to talk some Los Angeles wrestling.
We're going to New York talking Capital Wrestling.
Okay, well, I'm stoned. Cue the bong rep. We're going to talk Capital Wrestling. Right. We'll see you next week, folks.